I still remember the day my father said the words that broke something inside me. We were sitting at the dinner table. My little brother Ryan was laughing and talking about his soccer game at school. Dad was smiling at him like he was the most important person in the world. Then Dad looked at me. His smile disappeared. He shook his head slowly and said, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" The room became very quiet. My mother looked down at her plate. Ryan stopped talking, and I just sat there, holding my fork, feeling my chest become tight. Because that was not the first time my father said something like that. But that night, it hurt more than ever. My name is Daniel. I am the older brother. Ryan is 3 years younger than me. For most people, having a younger brother means having a best friend. But for me, having a younger brother meant living in his shadow. And the worst part? My father was the one who created that shadow. When we were kids, things were not always like this. When Ryan was born, I was only 3 years old. I didn't understand much, but I remember feeling excited. I remember standing next to my mother in the hospital. She was holding the tiny baby in her arms. "Daniel," she said softly, "this is your little brother." Ryan's eyes were closed. His face was red and small. I touched his tiny hand and said, "Hi." My mom smiled. My dad stood behind us and took a picture. For a moment, we looked like the perfect family. But as Ryan grew older, something slowly began to change. At first, I didn't notice it. When Ryan was 5 and I was 8, Dad started taking him everywhere. Soccer practice, the park, ice cream trips. At the beginning, I thought it was normal. But then I started noticing something strange. Dad never asked me to come. One afternoon, I was sitting in the living room doing homework when Ryan ran inside wearing a bright red soccer uniform. "Dad! Dad! Let's go!" Ryan shouted happily. Dad grabbed the car keys and laughed. "Ready, champ?" Ryan nodded excitedly. I looked up from my homework. "Dad, can I come watch the game?" Dad glanced at me for a second. Then he shrugged. "You wouldn't enjoy it." And just like that, they walked out the door. I sat there in the quiet house, listening to the car drive away. That was the first time I felt the strange feeling in my chest. It was small back then, but it slowly grew bigger every year. Ryan was good at many things. He was funny, he was confident, he made friends easily, teachers liked him, neighbors liked him, and most importantly, Dad adored him. At dinner, Dad always asked Ryan about his day. "So, champ," Dad would say with a big smile, "did you score today?" Ryan would laugh and say, "2 goals." Dad would clap his hands proudly. "That's my boy." Sometimes Ryan would look at me and grin. "Daniel doesn't like sports." Dad would chuckle. "Yeah, Daniel is different." Different. That word followed me everywhere. When I brought home a good test score, Dad barely looked at it. "That's nice," he would say without interest. But when Ryan won a small soccer trophy, Dad placed it in the center of the living room like it was a golden crown. "Look at this," he told everyone who visited. "My son is a star." Sometimes people would ask, "Which son?" Dad always pointed at Ryan. And every time, something inside me felt smaller. My mother tried to balance things. She would sometimes sit next to me and say softly, "Your father just loves soccer. That's why he spends so much time with Ryan." But I knew it wasn't just about soccer. It was about pride. Ryan made Dad proud. I didn't. I was quiet. I liked books. I liked drawing. I liked building small things with my hands. But those things didn't matter to Dad. One evening when I was 13, I showed him a small wooden birdhouse I built in school. "Look, Dad," I said carefully. "I made this today." He looked at it for 2 seconds. Then Ryan ran into the room. "Dad! Coach said I might be team captain next year." Dad's eyes lit up. "That's amazing!" He stood up immediately and started asking Ryan many questions. The birdhouse was still in my hands, but no one looked at it again. That night, I placed the birdhouse on the shelf in my room. I stared at it for a long time. Then I whispered to myself, "It's okay." But it didn't feel okay. The older we got, the more obvious everything became. Ryan became Dad's favorite topic. Dad went to every soccer game, every school event, every award ceremony. But when I had a small school art exhibition, Dad didn't come. He said he was too busy. Later, I learned he was watching Ryan's practice instead. That night, I sat on my bed, staring at the empty chair that should have been his. I told myself something that changed my life. I said, "Maybe Dad just doesn't like me." It was a painful thought, but it felt true. The worst part was that Ryan didn't even notice how different things were. To him, everything was normal. He was just living his happy life. Sometimes he even teased me. One afternoon he said, "Dad says I might get a sports scholarship one day." Then he laughed. "You probably won't." I forced a smile. "Yeah, probably not." Ryan wasn't trying to be cruel. He just believed what Dad believed, that he was the special one. And I was just there. By the time I turned 17, the distance between me and my father felt like a giant wall. We barely talked. When we did, it was usually criticism. "Why are your grades not higher? Why don't you play sports? Why are you always in your room?" Every question felt like an attack. One evening, I finally asked him something I had been afraid to say for years. "Dad, do you think Ryan is better than me?" He looked surprised. Then he laughed a little. "Don't be so sensitive." But he didn't answer the question, and that silence told me everything. Still, I tried to believe things would change. I told myself maybe when I became an adult, Dad would respect me more. Maybe he would see my efforts. Maybe he would finally look at me the way he looked at Ryan. But I didn't know that the worst moment of my life was still waiting for me. Because 1 year later, my father would make a decision that would break my heart completely. And in that moment, I would finally understand something painful. In my father's eyes, I was never the son he truly wanted. The year I turned 18, the distance between me and my father became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just small moments anymore. It was everything. Every day felt like a reminder that I mattered less. Ryan was now 15. He had grown taller, stronger, and even more confident. Soccer had become his entire world, and my father lived inside that world with him. Every weekend, they woke up early and drove to soccer fields across the city. Sometimes they left before the sun came up. I would hear the front door close while I was still in bed. Then the house became quiet. Just me and my thoughts. One Saturday morning, I walked into the kitchen and saw my mother drinking coffee alone. "Did they leave already?" I asked. She nodded. "Ryan has an important match today." I opened the fridge slowly. "They always have an important match," I said. My mother sighed softly, but didn't reply. I knew she noticed the problem, but she never tried to stop it. Maybe she didn't know how. A few weeks later, something happened that made the pain stronger. My school was holding a science fair. I had spent months building a project, a small solar-powered water pump. It wasn't huge or fancy, but I was proud of it. For the first time in years, I wanted my father to see something I made. So one evening, I walked into the living room where he was watching TV with Ryan. "Dad," I said carefully, "the science fair is next Friday." He didn't look away from the screen. "Okay." "I'm presenting my project there," I continued. "It would mean a lot if you came." For a moment, he didn't answer. Then Ryan suddenly spoke. "Dad, Friday is our regional soccer game." My father immediately turned toward him. "That's right," he said. "The regional finals." Ryan nodded excitedly. "It's the biggest game of the season." Dad looked back at me. "Well, you understand, right?" he said. I stared at him. "You can't come for even a little while." He shook his head. "Ryan needs me there." Those 4 words felt like a punch to my chest. Ryan needs me there. I forced myself to nod. "Yeah, I understand." But deep inside, I didn't understand at all. The day of the science fair arrived. Students stood next to their projects while families walked around the gym. Parents were asking questions and taking pictures. Laughter filled the room. I stood alone next to my table. A few teachers stopped by and looked at my project. "Great work, Daniel," one teacher said kindly. But every few minutes, my eyes moved to the door. I kept hoping my father would walk in. Maybe he would surprise me. Maybe he would show up late. Maybe he would realize that I needed him too. But the door stayed closed. By the end of the event, I already knew the truth. He had chosen Ryan again. That night, when I got home, the living room was full of excitement. Ryan was jumping around with a huge smile. "We won! We won!" he shouted. Dad was laughing proudly. "My son scored the winning goal!" Ryan held up a small medal. "Look!" I stood quietly near the door. No one noticed me at first. Finally, my mom saw me. "Oh, Daniel, you're home!" Dad glanced at me for a second. "How was your thing?" he asked casually. My thing. Not even the science fair, just my thing. "It was fine," I said. Ryan suddenly ran toward me. "Daniel, you should have seen my goal," he said excitedly. "The whole crowd was cheering." I smiled weakly. "Sounds great." Dad clapped Ryan on the shoulder. "That's my boy," he said proudly. Then he turned back to the TV, where they were replaying parts of the match. My moment was already forgotten. After that night, something inside me started to change. For years, I had tried to earn my father's attention. I worked harder in school. I tried to talk more at dinner. I tried to show interest in Ryan's soccer games, but nothing worked. So slowly, I stopped trying. I spent more time in my room. I focused on my studies. I began planning my future without expecting anything from my father. If he didn't want to see me, I would stop asking him to look. But the tension in the house kept growing. One evening during dinner, Dad suddenly looked at my report card. "Your grades are good," he admitted. Then he added something that made my stomach twist. "But good grades alone won't make you successful." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He leaned back in his chair. "You need passion, drive, like your brother." Ryan looked up proudly. Dad continued talking. "Ryan fights for what he wants. He works hard on the field. That's real effort." I felt my face getting hot. "I work hard too," I said quietly. Dad shook his head. "Sitting with books is not the same." The words hit me harder than he probably realized, because studying was the one thing I had always been proud of. But even that didn't matter to him. Later that night, Ryan knocked on my bedroom door. "Hey," he said casually. "What?" He leaned against the door frame. "Dad is just proud of me because of soccer, that's all." I looked at him. "You don't think it's unfair?" Ryan shrugged. "I mean, I can't help that I'm good at it." I stayed silent. Ryan continued talking. "You should try sports too. Maybe Dad would like that." I laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "You really think it's that simple?" Ryan didn't answer. Maybe he had never thought deeply about it before. For him, life had always been easy. Dad's favorite son, the golden child. Months passed. Graduation was getting closer. Everyone kept asking the same question. "What will you do after high school?" I had already decided. I wanted to study engineering at a university in another city, far away from home, far away from the constant comparisons. One evening during dinner, I finally told my family. "I applied to North Valley University," I said. My mother looked surprised. "That's very far away." Ryan raised his eyebrows. "Why there?" I hesitated for a moment. Then I answered honestly, "I just want a fresh start." My father put down his fork slowly. "And how do you plan to pay for that?" he asked. "I'm applying for scholarships," I said. "And if you don't get one?" I looked directly at him. "I was hoping you might help." The room became very quiet. Dad leaned back in his chair. Then he said something that made my heart sink. "We'll see." Not yes. Not no. Just, "We'll see." But something about his voice made me uneasy. Like he had already made a decision. And I didn't realize it yet. But very soon, my father would prove exactly where I stood in his life. And the truth would hurt more than anything before. A few months after that dinner, the letter arrived. It was a warm afternoon. I had just come home from school when I saw a white envelope sitting on the kitchen table. My name was written on the front. My heart started beating faster. I knew what it was. With shaking hands, I opened it. Inside was the acceptance letter from North Valley University. I read the first line 3 times just to make sure it was real. Congratulations! I couldn't stop smiling. After years of feeling invisible in my own home, this felt like proof that I was capable of something. That night, I waited for everyone to come home so I could tell them the news. Ryan came in first, throwing his soccer bag on the floor. "What's up?" he asked. I held up the letter. "I got in." He looked surprised. "Seriously?" I nodded. "Yeah?" Ryan smiled a little. "Well, that's cool." It wasn't a huge reaction, but it was something. A few minutes later, my parents walked in. Dad looked tired as usual. Before he could sit down, I handed him the letter. "I got accepted," I said. He read it quietly. Then he nodded once. "That's good." Just 2 words. That was it. No excitement, no hug, no pride. But I tried not to let it bother me, because there was still one more important conversation. The one about money. A week later, I finally brought it up again. Dad was sitting in the living room looking at his phone. I stood near the doorway. "Dad, can we talk?" He didn't look up. "About what?" "About university." He sighed and placed the phone down. "All right, sit." I sat across from him. For a moment, I felt like a little kid again, nervous about asking for something. "I received the tuition information," I said carefully. Dad nodded. "And?" "It's expensive," I admitted. "But if I get a partial scholarship, I only need help with the rest." He leaned back in his chair. "How much?" I told him the number. The room became quiet. Finally, he said, "That's a lot of money." "I know," I said quickly, "but it's a good school, and engineering has strong job opportunities." Dad rubbed his forehead. "Why can't you go to the local college instead?" My chest tightened. "Because North Valley is much better for my major." He shrugged. "Better doesn't always mean necessary." I swallowed hard. "So, you won't help me?" Dad didn't answer immediately. Instead, he said something strange. "We need to think about the future." "I am thinking about the future," I said. But he shook his head. "No, I mean Ryan's future." My stomach dropped. "What does Ryan have to do with this?" At that moment, Ryan walked into the room with a big smile. "Dad, guess what?" Dad looked at him. "What?" Ryan held up his phone. "My coach says a professional youth academy is interested in me." Dad jumped to his feet. "Are you serious?" Ryan nodded excitedly. "They want me to train with them next year?" Dad looked happier than I had ever seen him. "This is huge!" Ryan laughed. "I know." They started talking quickly about training, travel, and opportunities. I was still sitting on the couch, completely forgotten. 2 days later, my father called a family meeting. We sat around the dining table. His expression was serious. "I have an announcement," he said. Ryan looked curious. My mother seemed nervous. Dad took a deep breath. "Ryan has been invited to join the elite youth soccer academy in the capital." Ryan grinned proudly. Dad continued talking. "This is a rare opportunity, Many professional players start their careers there. I nodded slowly. That's great. Then Dad said the words that changed everything. The training program is expensive, but I've decided we will pay for it. Ryan's eyes lit up. Really? Dad smiled proudly. Of course. I believe in your talent. Ryan jumped up and hugged him. Thank you, Dad. I felt a strange cold feeling in my chest. Then I asked the question that was already forming in my mind. Where is that money coming from? Dad looked at me calmly. From our savings. My throat felt dry. The same savings you said were needed for the future? He nodded. Yes. I stared at him. So, there's no money for my university? Silence filled the room. Finally, he said the words that broke me. We can't afford both. My heart started pounding. You mean you won't afford both? Dad frowned. Don't twist my words. I stood up slowly. You chose him. Dad's voice became sharp. He has real potential. The words echoed in my head. Real potential. And I don't? I asked. Dad sighed like he was tired of the conversation. Engineering school isn't going anywhere. Ryan's chance might not come again. I felt something inside me crack. So my dream is less important? Ryan looked uncomfortable now. Daniel, it's not like that. But I couldn't stop. For 18 years, I said, my voice shaking. I watched you choose him again and again. Dad stood up too. That's not true. Yes, it is, I shouted. My mother whispered, Please calm down. But the pain had already exploded. You missed my events. You ignored my achievements. And now you're taking the money that could change my life and giving it to him. Dad's face hardened. I'm investing in the child with the best chance to succeed. The sentence hit me harder than anything he had ever said before. I couldn't breathe for a moment. Then I laughed bitterly. So that's it. No one spoke. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to cry in front of them. I finally understand, I said quietly. Ryan looked down at the table. Dad crossed his arms. If you work hard enough, you can still find your own way. His words felt empty. I grabbed the acceptance letter from the table. This was the one moment I hoped you would believe in me, I said. My voice broke slightly. But I guess that was stupid. I turned and walked out of the room. No one followed me. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom. The acceptance letter was lying on my desk. For years, I had tried to earn my father's love, tried to prove that I mattered too. But now the truth was clear. In his eyes, I would always be second place, always the extra son, the one who didn't shine. Tears finally rolled down my face, not just from anger, but from something deeper, a painful realization. I had spent my whole life trying to win a game that was already decided. And the worst part? The judge of that game was my own father. But as I sat there in a quiet room, another thought slowly appeared in my mind. A dangerous one. If my father believed I would never succeed, maybe one day, I would prove him completely wrong. The night after the argument, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying my father's words. I'm investing in the child with the best chance to succeed. Every time I remembered that sentence, my chest felt tight. For years, I had hoped that maybe my father just didn't understand me. Maybe he was busy. Maybe he didn't notice. But now I knew the truth. He noticed. He simply didn't believe in me. And that realization hurt more than anything. The next morning, I woke up early. The house was quiet. I walked into the kitchen and saw my mother sitting there alone. She looked tired. "Did you sleep?" she asked softly. "Not really," I said. She sighed. "I'm sorry about what happened last night." I nodded slowly. "Did you know?" I asked. Her eyes dropped to the table. "Your father believes Ryan has a rare opportunity." "That's not what I asked," I said quietly. She stayed silent, and that silence gave me my answer. She knew. Everyone knew. I was the only one who still believed things might be fair. 2 weeks later, Ryan left for the capital to begin training at the academy. The house suddenly became quieter than ever. Dad drove him there himself. They were gone for 3 days. When they came back, Dad couldn't stop talking about the academy. "The facilities are amazing," he told Mom. "The coaches are professional level." Then he looked at me. "If Ryan works hard, he could have a real career." I nodded. "That's good." But something inside me had already changed. I stopped expecting anything from him. I stopped hoping for approval. Instead, I started focusing on something else. My own future. Since my father refused to help, I had only one option: find my own way. So every day after school, I started searching for scholarships, grants, part-time jobs, anything that could help. Some nights, I stayed awake until 2 in the morning filling out applications. Sometimes it felt impossible. But strangely, I also felt stronger. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to prove something to my father. I was doing it for myself. One afternoon, my phone rang while I was studying. It was an unknown number. "Hello? Is this Daniel?" "Yes." "Hi, Daniel. This is Ms. Carter from North Valley University." My heart started racing. "Yes?" "I'm calling about your scholarship application." I held my breath. "We were very impressed with your academic record and your engineering project." I didn't say anything. Then she said the words that changed everything. "You have been awarded the full academic scholarship." For a moment, I thought I heard wrong. I'm sorry. Did you say full?" "Yes," she replied warmly. "Your tuition will be completely covered." My legs felt weak. I sat down on the chair slowly. "That's incredible." She laughed softly. "We believe you have great potential, Daniel." Great potential. The words echoed in my mind. For the first time in my life, someone truly believed in me. That evening, I told my parents. Mom looked shocked. "A full scholarship?" I nodded. Dad stared at me silently. "You don't need our money?" he asked. "No," I said calmly. For the first time in years, I felt something different when I looked at him. Not anger, not sadness, just distance. "I figured it out," I said. He nodded slowly. "Well?" That's good. But his voice sounded strange, almost uncertain. 3 months later, I moved to North Valley University. The campus was huge, new people, new opportunities, and most importantly, a fresh start. For the first time, no one compared me to Ryan. No one treated me like the second best son. I was just Daniel, and I worked harder than ever. Years passed. I graduated at the top of my engineering program. Soon after, I joined a growing technology company. The job was challenging, but I loved it. Slowly, my life began to change. My salary increased. I moved into a nice apartment. I built a future with my own hands. And something strange happened. The further I went in life, the less I thought about my father's approval. Then one day, I received a call from my mother. Her voice sounded worried. "Daniel, can you come home this weekend? Is everything okay?" She hesitated. "It's about Ryan." My stomach tightened. What happened? "He had a serious injury during training." The words hit me hard. When? Last month. And now? The doctors say he may never play professionally. I sat in silence. For years, Ryan's entire future had been built around soccer. Now that dream was gone. That weekend, I returned home for the first time in a long while. Ryan looked different. He sat quietly on the couch, his leg in a brace. When he saw me, he smiled weakly. "Hey!" "Hey," I replied. We talked for a while. For the first time in years, he seemed unsure of himself. "I don't know what I'm going to do now," he admitted. Then my father walked into the room. He looked older, more tired. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Finally, he said something unexpected. "I heard about your job." "Yeah." He nodded slowly. "You've done well." It was the closest thing to praise I had ever heard from him. But strangely, I didn't feel the same excitement I once dreamed about, because I no longer needed it. Before I left that weekend, my father stopped me near the front door. "I might have been too hard on you," he said quietly. The words hung in the air. For many years, I had imagined hearing something like that. An apology, a moment of regret. But now it felt different, not powerful, just late. I looked at him calmly. "Maybe," I said. He nodded slowly. Then he said something else. "I was wrong about potential." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I picked up my bag. "I hope Ryan finds a new dream," I said. And I truly meant it, because despite everything, he was still my brother. As I walked to my car, I thought about the long road behind me. Years of feeling invisible. Years of trying to win my father's approval. But life had taught me an important lesson. Sometimes the people who doubt you the most become the reason you prove yourself. Not for revenge, not for pride, but for something far more important, your own self-worth. I started the engine and drove away from the house. This time, I didn't feel like the forgotten son anymore, because I had finally built something stronger than my father's approval. I had built belief in myself,